Hello everyone! Now that we have a basic understanding for white charcoal and pastel pencils, we are going to apply our knowledge of creating forms to a still life OA. So what you're going to do in the next page in your sketchbooks, I would like you to create a rectangle on your page. Be careful how hard you draw your pressure. As you can see on the bottom, I do have a white line showing because I wanted to extend my box. But that can get covered hopefully when I add in my pencil to color the background. Right now you can see me actually blocking out the basic shapes of all the forms that I see. It is very essential that we block out just the shapes, and we want to block it out lightly. Remember, we always draw light until it's right to make sure that everything is in the correct space before we put in any value, so that we make sure all the proportions are accurate. From there, once you finish blocking everything out, we can start adding our value. So I'm still going to be referring to my photo, making sure that I'm looking closely at where these details are falling. Even some of the shadows look like certain shapes. So what I'm doing right now is blocking out the shapes that I see in the different values. Because I chose to do my still life in color, the example that you see is in color, but if you are doing it in just white charcoal, then the area that you see that's in blue will be more of the black of your paper, okay? And then even other shadows in here, you can see I am still utilizing the black of my paper for shadows as we go on, but again, pushing those darker values first will be easier because you're using less pressure. And if you need to erase, then it'll go away easier. Remember though to be mindful when you are blocking out these values, because if you do go over one area too many times, or even erasing it too many times, you will lose the tooth of the paper, which means that the pastels will not want to adhere or stick to the paper anymore. So just be very mindful and really pay attention to where each value is falling. Looking at your photo, even the pumpkin I'm doing right now, all these little divots, I counted them. I wanted to make sure, like if you look, there's 3 on the left side. You can clearly see 3 on my left side too. Going around to the side, we have 1 on the top, 2, 3, 4. You can count mine, they're exactly the same. So just being very mindful, looking at the entire picture, looking at the shape of it, and then going in and adding your value. So again, looking back at my piece, I'm using lighter pressure for more like darker valued areas, but the areas that are getting hit directly from the light, those are my brighter areas, so I'm putting more pressure. And once I'm done with it, I'm done with it. I move on. You don't want to stay in the same area too long, because again, that's how we lose the tooth of the paper. My white pumpkin is simply just white, so I'm using like a value scale when applying my values in my pumpkin, going from bright white to a little bit of a darker value on the side where the shadows are. For the stem, I am using white and also using brown for the shadows. What's really cool about this, if you notice how I created my textures, I basically just added lines and I added a little bit of shadows towards the bottom and top to provide contrast. Speaking of contrast, use a darker value for the background to really push your pumpkins forward. Because I have a lot of orange and blue already in my pumpkins, because that's the colors that I chose to use, I'm going to continue using blue in my background because the blue is a cool color and I want the cool colors to recede, whereas my orange will be popping forward as well as my white. You can still see with my orange that I can use less pressure and utilize some of the black of the paper to show darker values. And then going in a little bit with white to push my lighter values and get those highlights where the light source is directly hitting my pumpkin. Speaking of value and paying close attention to those details and values, it's not always about making it look exactly the same, but making sure that the values are similar and that you see similar textures while you're working. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Right now you can kind of see that I was utilizing contrast around my pumpkin and then fading it to a brighter blue at the top to also practice with my color gradation, going from one color to another. Here it's more of a monochromatic value scale because I am going from a darker blue to a lighter blue, but I'm still practicing with blending and making sure it's a nice, smooth blend from dark blue to light blue. Going back into my pumpkin, I'm starting to block out the rest of my orange within my back pumpkin. And then I'll be going to the pumpkins in the front. So again, you can see how the pumpkins in the front are overlapping the pumpkins in the back. Again, just using value and putting in some little stipplings, so little dots on my stem to kind of show the little pricklies. And again, like using just a little bit of white to imply that value. It's all about implying where the value is, making sure that the values are looking similar when comparing to your reference photo. If it doesn't look exactly the same, that's fine. We're totally learning right now. But just looking really close at that texture that you might see. How the light changes, where the light source is hitting. Looking at this little pumpkin I'm creating right now, like in the stem, I could see that there's a little bit of light hitting towards the bottom. There's shadows towards the very bottom, so I used a little bit of dark blue to push that darker, and then I used less pressure green in those areas as well. I also noticed that there's a little bit of texture in there, so I'm using white stippling dots to kind of add that texture. There's also some scratches in there, so I'll be putting some scratches in and also ending it with some bright highlights. Now that I'm happy with how my little pumpkin looks, I'm going to finish off my background. I established the table line from the far back and also applying some shadows in the back that you can see where my pumpkin is sitting, pushing that contrast. Now I am starting my final pumpkin. I'm blocking in where the creases are, using less pressure to show the darker values. And now again, putting in more shadows under my pumpkin for that cast shadow. And then as you go into your stem, again, really pay close attention to those values. I see that it's darker underneath and then brighter on the top. It's also there's a lot of lines, like in the texture of this stem specifically, not as much pricklies as those other two, more like the white pumpkin one. So I just overlapped a lot of different lines. I used some brown and I used some orange to kind of push in some shadows. I even decided to go in with some darker brown and even red later on, because looking closely at my photo, it did look sort of red orangey and brown, so I mixed those in to push my shadows. There was still even some highlights towards the center of my stem close to the pumpkin, so I did be sure to add some highlights in there as well to show some nice contrast and make it pop out. Going back into the form of my pumpkin, I started to block in my lighter values, slowly building up my pressure, but still making sure to use light pressure in the dark areas and more pressure towards the light areas, which are towards the top of my pumpkin, or also like the creases that are kind of popping out. The creases that are going in are more shadowed. Also going in with a lighter value, I blocked out where my shadow is from my stem, and then going in and starting to push those values more. Again, being very mindful and precise, looking at your photo, making sure that you're blocking out the values accurately, and then keep building them up. So I'm going to keep switching to a lighter pencil. I'm going to pull in my white to pull in those highlights where the light source is hitting directly. And then after I'm happy with how my pumpkin looks, I will finish off the rest of my table, and then this piece will be done. And I'm very pleased with how this piece ended up turning out. There's a lot of use of color and value in here, so I can't wait to see how you use value and or color, depending on your choice, for your still life OA. Happy drawing, everybody, and I hope you enjoyed this process.